rotate around the individual, but the individual doesn't survive in a vacuum. The individual survives in family, among friends, among workmates, and the general community. And so when we talk about psychosocial, I picked something from the UNHCR mental health and psychosocial model in emergency situations. And it says that psychosocial underlies the psychological and social processes that are always interconnected and continually interact to influence well-being. So as individuals, when we come together, we become community, we become society. And so our feelings, when we talk about psychological processes, we are talking about feelings, we are talking about thoughts, we are talking about beliefs. We've been talking about stigma. Some of the stigma comes from beliefs and attitudes and perceptions that we have towards people. And that influences the way we interact with them. And sometimes our beliefs and feelings and thoughts and memories and experiences influences how we interact with other people all the time. And so psychosocial has to do with our psychological well-being and the way we interact with other people and then form a community. And so when you have a community that has been wounded or is under a crisis, then you have people's interactions change. We have changed with COVID. We put on masks. When I hold a microphone, after I hold it, give it to someone else, it is sanitized. What's the implication? That I might be infected. How does that feel? So those dynamics, we don't see them. They are not physical. They are psychological, they are mental, but they affect the way we respond to life. Today we fear each other at work. We fear each other at conferences. You go to hug someone, you remember, it's COVID. What impact does that have on our well-being? So psychosocial rotates around that. And psychosocial support underlies every interventions that help us to deal with those dynamics, feelings, thoughts, perceptions, beliefs, culture, religion. She was talking about religion, all that. Okay, and so when you look at COVID-19, I'll not dwell so much on this because people have talked about it. But what I want to emphasize is that COVID-19 created a crisis. A crisis is something that is abrupt, that is overwhelming, to many people. And I think COVID became very overwhelming. If we remember what happened when the lockdown happened, the president gave a very short time for people to pick their children very fast. And then in a very few days, transport was closed. And then private people were allowed to move. And then eventually private cars were stopped. Like things happened very, very, very fast. Now that is not normal life. And because it's not normal life, it disrupts human normal interaction and normal well-being. And so it brings a psychological imbalance that disturbs people and make them very vulnerable to distress, to depression, to conflict. And all that has affected all of us in different levels. So the crisis. And when we talk about refugees, refugees have gone through crisis before. They have gone through situations where they are ill-prepared and they are running away and guns following them and all that. And so when COVID-19 comes and brings such a crisis, their experience is different from all of us probably who have not gone through such a crisis. Livelihood. For people who earn hand to mouth on a daily basis, I'm very sure 95% of refugees are like that, especially those in the urban. Now, even in the settlement, food ratios were reduced because of the crisis. And we know that food is a basic need. And so without food, psychologically, someone will feel insecure. Imagine when the lockdown was happening, when the president said, on this day, there's lockdown. Everyone ran into the supermarket to buy toilet paper. I remember seeing some news saying toilet papers are finished. Buying toilet papers, food, everything. Just imagine people who earn hand to mouth, who earn a daily living by selling vegetables, and those informal sector businesses who were not able, because they didn't have money to prepare. Now, one of the most disturbing things mentally is a human being losing control of their life, is not being able to prepare. So if you're not able to buy food and stock, and the following day you're not going to work, imagine what kind of feeling the person has, hopelessness. And then, of course, I've talked about the social interaction. We are distant, you don't hug someone, you don't shake hands, you put on a mask. You fear coming close to a workmate, you work from home, you go back home and you fear interacting with children, with family members, because you don't know where you have passed. All that is destabilizing the normal and creating a crisis. And change in work, I've talked about it, working from home. What did it mean to you to adjust to working from home? How many of us have the workspaces at home to work from there? And children asking you why you're working, and the president said, there's no work, it's lockdown. That kind of explanation. How many of us are able to explain to our children what is going on? What impact does that have? Imagine parents who went to schools to pick their children. What did they tell their children? Children don't respond very well to unpredictability. So that coming from home, coming from school and going home and being home, not knowing when you're going back to school, and it's been prolonged forever. Of course, I'm exaggerating it, but 7 months, 8 months is a big time for parents to have children at home. Please. Now I'm going to the refugees. Before the lockdown, how were refugees? What about their psychosocial difficulties and challenges? We all know that forced migrants are more susceptible to mental health and psychosocial difficulties because of the traumatic experiences they have gone through. Now, I'm giving our own experience. Refugee Law Project provides counseling and psychosocial support to clients. And the figure you see there, 558, is only for Kampala. And if you go to places like Lamu, Adjumani, Chiriandongo, the figure is over 1,000 per year. Now, during this time, it has doubled. But what we see is that the level of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, suicidal ideation is high. And during COVID-19, it has increased. If some of us listened to the executive director, Butabika Hospital, on the World Mental Health Day, the 10th of October, you'll agree with what I'm saying. Their inpatients in Butabika doubled. Per year, they respond to 500 people in the hospital. During COVID, during this time, they have already received 1,500. That is times 3. Now, that gives you, of course, it doesn't disaggregate refugees and hosts, but we know from our work that we have referred some refugees there. And during lockdown, it wasn't possible. And people struggled. People who were on medication for mental health diseases struggled really because of that. Children continue to struggle with social, emotional difficulties. Refugee Law Project has done some assessment of children through their caretakers, of course, to follow child protection and safeguarding measures. And one of the children we have, during the time we have made the assessment, we have assessed about 130 children. And we have found out from their caretakers that 50% of those have experienced sexual violence, either themselves or witnessing their caretakers being sexually violated, or seeing other people within the community. What's the impact of that on their mental well-being? And what we have had caretakers say, please, I know, I'm very aware my child is not okay. I have seen this, I have seen nightmares, they are withdrawn, but I don't know how to talk to them. Refugee Law Project, please help us. But those services are not there for children. And some of the focus group discussions we have done, children are saying, no, we want to get out. It's too much, we are confined, it's like we are in prison. And parents are on a lot of pressure to contain their children. And because they are also under stressful situations, they don't have the emotional ability to speak calmly or to explain. So who is responding to these needs? Now, I tried to mess up my screen with this. And these are some of the psychosocial impacts that I can talk about. Livelihood, it has been talked about very much. Even the chairperson, Lamo, talked about it. Stigma. I was told of a scenario by our staff in Lamo where 2 zones, some people, a case was found positive, was confirmed positive there. And about 35 people were taken into quarantine. And when they came back, it was not possible to integrate. It took them a long time. And one of the cases, one person was pushed out and stayed outside for days. That is stigma. So, and it is happening across both refugees and hosts. Disruption in education for children. And we know that this is not going to be the same. Children have been affected. The chairperson has talked about children dropping out of school. Yes, some of them have gotten pregnant. The representative Biaruhanga talked about it. They have got pregnant. Some have gotten discouraged. For some, they're not going to go back because their parents don't have the school fees. They have eaten all of it. And because they don't have work, where are they going to get money to take them back? So, people resorting to negative coping mechanisms, alcohol, moving around. In one of the cases that we have handled, a parent, a gentleman, shared with us that what he would do during the lockdown, he would get out of the home and move around within the community and come back late in the night. Why? Because he wants to avoid the embarrassment of not being able to provide for the family. And so family conflict. But to go very quickly, of course, boredom for children. Children needs are very high. They have been high before. COVID-19 has made it worse. Who is responding and what can we do? Now, if I go to increased frustration and anxiety, some of us who watch, of course, we watch news, we saw a gentleman who burnt himself in Masaka. That's the heightened level of anxiety that makes someone commit suicide. That's mental health. But the crisis brings that. And then to come back to the refugees, the executive director still, I'll go back to her because she's an expert, talked about how people who had managed their mental health, people can live with mental health, depression, epilepsy, and other mental health issues, and they manage them and they live and become functional. But what she said is that they have seen a lot of relapses. Relapse means that someone had managed the alcohol and they were off alcohol for a long time, for example, and now because of the distress that COVID has brought, they go back to drinking. So they can't manage their mental wellness any longer because of the disruption. Now, when it comes to refugees, relapses have been a lot. Even us within Refugee Law Project, we have handled people who had managed their life, they were moving on with life, they were doing small jobs to survive, but because of COVID-19, they went back to depression. And re-traumatization. Refugees, because they have gone through trauma before, they have gone through crisis before, COVID-19 has opened a lot of wounds for them. Okay, so, and then Here I put some quotes. One of the ways that mental health workers use to communicate the impact and the experiences of people is to tell people what people say. And so one of them, I've picked a few quotes from our work. So one of the clients during a dialogue, I picked this from Lamo, said, "Our brains are locked. We can't think normally." And then the other one says, "Mommy, why do we get problems all the time? Are we cursed?" Refugees have faced this from children a lot. "But mommy, why do we get disaster after disaster? After running away from our home, we are here, we have nothing, we have no food, and then COVID comes. Are we cursed? Are we okay?" Now, that is a psychological problem. Home is very boring. I want to just get out. A child in Kampala, not knowing where to get food has reminded me of the days of hunger I lived through during flight. I can feel it. I can feel it means the person is actually feeling it in the here and now. Okay. And then, what has this meant for us as Refugee Law Project and other organizations? One is that our interventions have changed from face-to-face modalities, including individual, family, group, home visit, which we do regularly to support people, to more online services, telemental health, to strengthening community structures. Dr. Chris talked about it, and I think the chairperson talked about it. We do a lot of building support groups to strengthen refugees to be able to take care of each other. But this comes with challenges. When you go online and people are not used to it, it's a change. People have to adjust to that change. Both the staff, the mental health workers, the psychosocial workers, the legal officers, because where the legal officers go to prisons and police to follow up cases, there are people there who have psychosocial and mental health challenges. Most of the time they don't get the support they need because the support is limited. And so there are challenges. Refugees are not used to phone telecounseling. They're not used to Zoom. They're not used to online support. So that change is also something to adjust to. The staff equally. Staff for over a long time were not trained in those skills. And so, yes, we are doing the training, we are orienting staff, but it is something to adjust to. Okay, can we continue? Now, when I talk about support groups, Refugee Law Project has over 30 support groups across all the locations, Kampala and other settlements. And what we saw during the lockdown, for example, in Kampala, is that when we were not able to reach out to the clients, the support group leaders were able to reach out to them. They were able to make referrals. GRS is here, Godfrey is here. And so they were able to make referrals to GRS, to CAFOMI, to NRC, to UNHCR. They were able to make those. I know of a support group leader who would walk from Masaja to Nsambia to take clients' needs to GRS. And so that is very, very, very strong. And I think going forward, as we prioritize refugee management and changing with a new normal that we have, I think building community structures, we have learned that that is the way to go. And then, so what are the existing gaps? One of them is lack of funding. Mental health and MHPSS is not funded, is not prioritized. It is still, that's why we don't have enough personnel. When I was preparing this, usually we talk about psychiatrists. And we say we have about 40 psychiatrists in Uganda. How many are we in Uganda? About 40 million. Now, but let us leave alone psychiatrists, because psychiatrists, by the time people reach to psychiatrists, they have gone through a lot of support through counselors, through social workers, through clinical psychologists. And I was trying to find out how many are there. And I found out that actually counselors are very many. There are over 2,000. And at the end of this month, we are going to have a conference, a Uganda Councillors Association conference, which Refugee Law Project is partnering with the Uganda Councillors Association to organize it, which is a big step for us. And we shall see how many they are. There are over 2,000. We have over 70 clinical psychologists. But where are they? What are they doing? Where are they in refugee management? Yet we know that there's a lot of mental health issues. Maybe it's because we don't recognize their work. Maybe it's because we haven't recognized how important mental health is. Okay, so funding is low. Young people are not prioritized. There are still a lot of needs. Adopting new modalities, telemental health, we need training. We need orientation. We need refresher. Everyone, every psychosocial worker, mental health worker, social workers, we need that because we are not used to it. 2, the clients themselves. There are many clients we tried to give psychosocial support over the phone during lockdown. Even now, even during this period, at Refugee Law Project, we are trying to discourage clients coming to our offices. But some insist that they have to come to office and see the counselor, or the counselor has to visit them. And I agree with them. Some of them need a physical face-to-face. But some of them, a phone can work, but because they're not used to it. So we need to do a lot of sensitization to help people. And what are some of the lessons that we have learned? One of the key lessons we have learned is that strengthening community to take care of their needs is number one. Because the time when we were in lockdown, even now, our work with support group leaders, refugee support group leaders, has intensified, and it has shown us that they can do a lot of work in making referrals, but also providing psychological first aid to their members. So we need to do a lot of training and mentoring for community support groups so that we build resilience. I used to hear this book where there's no doctor. I think this actually can equate to where there's no doctor. The community can take care of their needs. Okay, and we still believe that specialized MHPSS, including counseling and psychotherapy, is still very highly needed for people who have heightened mental and psychosocial needs. And then what are some of the opportunities as we look at refugee management? I think the opportunities is that much as we are struggling mentally, majority of us, the recognition of MHPSS is gaining momentum. And that is very key because it's going to help to address many things. We are able to extend psychosocial support to hard-to-reach areas. During lockdown, we were able to call people in Lamo, in Hoima, in Changwali, in Mbarara to provide support. We were able to organize Zoom calls with support groups across Uganda, wherever our office is. We were able to be joined by young people on a youth discussion about psychosocial support. And that is an opportunity for us. Building more community structures, I've talked about this, and then capacity building online and the ability to build networks. Today we have people who are speaking from outside the country. Before, we couldn't think about that. But COVID-19 has challenged us to think about that. Thank you very much. I've used a lot of time. I usually do that. Sorry about that. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you, Barry, for your presentation. And I think we're really doing badly with time because we need to have a more interactive discussion with the audience. We'll have the next presenter such that we'll have the discussion immediately after his submission. I'll take this opportunity to invite Mr. Byarahanga Godfrey to share with us the COVID-19 and its effect on the registration of refugees. Kindly use 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I will save you. I will not use 20 minutes. I will divide by 2 and I use 10. Because when you talk about registration of refugees, it cuts across. And all these other presentations are based on the registration of refugees. What has COVID-19 done to us in terms of registration? First things first, borders were closed. His Excellency the President, in his own wisdom, and for the good of all of us, the only shortcut was to close borders to avoid importation of more cases of COVID-19. What did the ministry do? The line minister for refugees and disaster declared closure of asylum space because borders were already closed and we could not access new arrivals coming into our country. When asylum space is closed, what next? It means the whole function of registration is put on a hold. Put on a hold, why? Because by that time the guidelines, actually there were not even guidelines. It was a total lockdown. With a few guidelines were there, but I think SOPs. The ministry had not come up with SOPs about some of these meetings. Number 4, we all know that we normally get big numbers in terms of asylum seekers and refugees at the points of registration. And therefore, issues to do with social distancing, issues to do with sanitizing and washing hands for both refugees and the 4 front runners, the staff. We said, no, we cannot manage this at this moment. Let us avoid direct contact between staff and asylum seekers. Remember, at the time of closure, we had a very big number of refugees who had entered the country and they were not yet registered. Now, we categorized that as a backlog between Office of the Prime Minister and UNHCR. We agreed that now, the moment we resume, this is the first priority, because there were many people who were already in the country by the time we closed our borders. But the other negative part of it is that now these people could not access services. I can marry this submission into what Chairperson was presenting, delivery of services. Because you will not deliver services to these people because they are not known in terms of registration, they are not in our database, and there was a lot of, course, lack of documentation. Without documents, then you can't access some of these services. So it was a big blow from March up to at the beginning of July, when we had a number of meetings, say, what can we do? We have SOPs in place. Can we work toward this and see how we can have small numbers coming to our points of registration? We work on the backlog. And we thought numbers were not all that big. But as I said from my opening remarks, that actually there were very many children who were produced between March and July. So the numbers became so big, so huge, that we needed actually to stop the exercise a bit to first invest a lot in PPEs. And I think some of our settlements have not even resumed registration. Kampala resumed, followed by Nakivale. I think Hoima started doing some work. Ajmani is still stuck, working on how they can implement the SOPs. And then Arua, who I think they will open registration of backlog starting this week or next week. So you can see we are talking in the past, but actually for us, we are not in the past. We are in the present, that up to now, we have locations where we have not resumed registration because we still lack some of these PPEs that may help us to do this good work. How does it affect the operation and the response? It affects the response in terms of planning. Without actual numbers, planning is affected absolutely. And even some of the actors, humanitarian actors, who are willing to support us, we may not be having the actual figures now. It may not have affected planning for this year, but also planning for 2021. I know we have contingency plans in place, but usually we project the number that may be coming into the country. Now, the different story is that we already have some of these people in the country, but now they may not add up to the figures we are having. We are talking of 1.43, but the number could have gone beyond that. Without proper registration now, we are also having, of course, issues in terms of security, because if you can't have documents to identify yourself, most especially the common documents we have in refugee fraternity is attestation form and refugee identity card. If these documents are not available, and maybe you are caught on the other side of the law, streets of Kampala, or even within the communities where you live, and you can't identify yourself, you are not registered anywhere, it puts your security at stake. And at times, time and again, we have gone to police to explain that actually these ones have finished level 1 registration, they are not yet in our database, but you know, it takes a lot of time, and somehow, somewhere, this person may not be served very well in terms of security. You may be taken to be someone else. And at times, we have also seen some of the criminals in Kampala, when they are got on the other side of the law, they claim to be asylum seekers. We are actually here to seek asylum. But in this case, where you cannot even have any document, then it becomes very tricky. Remember, we are entering into a very sensitive period of our country, the electioning period. We are into elections time, and therefore, security is very serious with the movements and the people who are within the city, most especially. If you can't identify yourself, then you may have big issues. So we risk having issues of some of our persons of concern being arrested because of lack of these important documents. And I think the legal team of Refugee Law Project may be running up and down, see how they can help some of these asylum seekers. But before you run there, you better support us, and we resume registration fully in areas where it has not resumed because of resources. The other issue, of course, related to refugee registration, once it's not done in time, then you have, of course, restricted movements, not as part of lockdown or curfew, but also if you don't have documents, then it restrains you naturally to move. You can't move. You can't move because of fear. So it has also in some way restricted some of these people who are not yet registered to move from one location to another. And of course, as I conclude, protection issues, that because you need to be added, let's say, to family A, family Y, you had come for family reunion, lockdown, and suspension of registration, found when you are not yet added, then you can't even you cannot enjoy the same services with your family. Or at times, the family may risk having a number of people to benefit from the little resources that are extended to that family. And this is very common in the refugee settlement. You find on attestation form, there are 5 people, but in the household, there are 20 people. Because some people came, they are not yet added on the document, but they are sharing from the same resources available to the family of 5. We can't take that as a small problem. It is very huge. That means food which is supposed to be for 30 days, you may consume it in 5, 10 days. Simple mathematics. If food was for 5 people, but now it's being consumed by 10, now you can do the addition, subtraction, and division and see. It means this family may remain with a number of days without anything to eat. Remember, the other factors are kept constant. Livelihood issues, which we talked about. People can't now get the other side income. So it's a cycle. It's a protection cycle. And the basis is registration. And lastly, of course, we've been having verification exercise. Most of the challenges we've had as a country, you remember in 2017, we were put on a task as a country that our numbers had question marks, and we said, no, human beings are not trees, they are not static. People move, people die, people are born. So you can't tell me that because I'm talking of 1.43 million people now, it must be the same number tomorrow. As I talk right now, there is a child being born. As I talk right now, there is a person dying, God forbid, But that is the nature of life, and you can't change that. Now, we normally do this verification exercise to ascertain these numbers. For who? For planning purposes, for humanitarian actors, for me and you. So if we don't do this verification exercise, at times to ascertain the actual number becomes an issue. And from the look of things, we may not have one next year. We are planning to have one, but if we continue with this COVID, the numbers shooting up, then we are risking of having big numbers again, call people for verification. It's due for 2021, but from the look of things, we need to be on alert. And if we don't do this, the donors also need updated data, and it is going to be a very big challenge. So challenges are many, comrades, rotating on registration, and all of us here, if we don't belong somewhere, then there is a problem. So it's not only about refugees. I always want to compare refugees and nationals, because when we live in the world of refugees, then it fits the other good policy, the settlement policy. Even Ugandans who cannot actually be recognized in a certain community, they have challenges. Now, if they can have challenges, yet they are home, what about those who are outside their homes? They are not registered, they cannot be recognized. I leave it to you, and I thank you for listening to me. I have used 11 minutes, and I've spared 9 minutes for you. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biarohanga Godfrey. The theme of our conference is the future of refugee management in Africa. Particularly, we are focusing on the Great Lakes region. You've clearly articulated that OPM needs resources to ensure that the registration of refugees is done, because the registration is key in planning, and a number of development partners and donors need these statistics to help them be able to plan for refugees. Maybe to start, are there some opportunities that the OPM has seen due to the COVID-19, in mechanisms of how we can improve our system of registration? Because key, under the gist of the whole discussion here, we're looking at, personally, the director talked about it, the sustainability aspect. So as OPM, what opportunities are you seeing to ensuring that the future of the refugees, particularly in managing the registration aspect, is catered for?
Thank you so much. I don't see any opportunity in terms of registration. We've seen opportunities of COVID-19 in other areas. But in asylum space, where you need physical interaction in terms of interviewing, in terms of screening, security screening, in terms of RSD, it is quite challenging doing it online. Also look at the categories, the people we get, most especially in the refugee settlement. I think it will be very difficult. Some countries have started exploiting chances of doing this asylum space and RSD online. I think South Africa is one of them, but a big challenge, very big challenge. If you look at the local communities where our refugees come from, it is quite challenging. So for us, as of now, I don't see any opportunity. I'm seeing how we can combine our heads together and see how we can improve the situation. And I want to clear the air. It is not because of lack of resources that is affecting registration. That's one of many factors, that we need a lot of money now to invest into PPEs and all that. But the biggest issue is implementing SOPs so that we can have these big groups of people registered. And that is between you and us. What are we doing? We have started to face the challenges, and as partners, we call upon you to come and support us. We have started. That is to be on record. We have again resumed RSD, and REC sessions are going on. I see my colleague, Peggy, is here. She has been part of REC team. We've been having sessions in Jinja, week in, week out. We've had sessions in Nakivara and Chaka. So we have started to face the challenges. But I don't see a direct opportunity which we can take up for future use in terms of registration. The best one would be doing it online, but looking at the factors I've mentioned, I think we still have a long way to go in order also to cater for protection needs of the communities we get. The few people in Kampala and some few settlements, you would see they may pick up on these issues to do with online, but 95% of the population we get, they are from local communities. Most of them have not been exposed to some of this technology. Others, of course, may not know even how to write and read. So it is also going to be very expensive. And I don't think as a department, we are looking into that direction. We are looking into a direction of how we can use what we have so that we can do all this. Lastly, the security of the state is given priority. You risk now creating loopholes which may affect us in terms of security if we don't do all these interviews, security screening, and medical screening at the time of arrival and registration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Habyaruhanga. And you have something to say? Apollo, there's a hand there. I think the registration thing needs, we thank OPM as you're sitting down to plan to see mechanisms of how to improve and ensure that everyone is registered. But I think for purposes of sustainability with this pandemic that we are in, it's very important that we think of alternatives to ensure registration of all refugees, as you highlighted the number of issues that are happening because of gaps in registration of refugees. Yes, please.
I wanted to put Hardnet Refugee Law Project. I wanted to put into perspective what we are talking about when we say that the registrations have halted. I'm a refugee. I've been in Chaka at the reception center, which is where registration starts. I've also been in Naki Valley at the reception center. I just want to put it into perspective what it means when you stop registration. In Chaka, at the reception center, food is not provided. Cooked food is not provided. What is provided is some items of food, but you don't have a stove. So the refugee has to somehow get somewhere to cook their food. And we're talking about refugees who have run away from home. We don't expect them to come with things like stoves, the clay stoves, right? So I had a lot of challenges finding food when I was at that reception center. I commend the fact that they had a toilet for people with disability, but food is something that you have to somehow get. And OPM or UNHCR, whoever is in charge, does not provide the food. Security is non-existent. For example, as females, there's no one that enforces females should sleep here, males should sleep here. So there's a lot of, especially for single females, there's a lot of things that can happen. In Naki Valley, food is provided, which is really good, but there is no toilet for people with disability. You have to do it in the jungle, and you are disabled. You have to figure out how to manage that situation. I do really appreciate the fact that they are provided food, lunch and dinner, beans and posho every day. But that's food, that's great. In Chakatu, there is no food. The food situation, you have to figure it out yourself. This is at the reception center. There is no electricity, and
Kindly summarize.
Yes, I just want to stress the security situation, especially for female, even male, actually, as we have seen recently. When I came from that settlement, I came to Refugee Law Project. I'm here because of Refugee Law Project. Maybe Dr. Chris knows him. Kim from Refugee Law Project received me when I was coming from the settlement. I was a complete mess. I'm actually dealing with it right now because of COVID-19. The trauma is coming back, and actually my brain is in lockdown. The situation in these reception centers is really not for human beings. It's not. It strips away your dignity. It strips away your self-respect. So stopping this registration means they have to stay at this reception center for longer periods of time.
Thank you.
Sorry for
Thank you very much
time.
for articulating those issues. And it's very good that the OPM officials are in this space, and you've clearly stated how refugees, how migrants that are in reception centers are struggling. So we really request OPM to see mechanisms of how you can strengthen the registration amidst the COVID-19, because the resources, you know, a number of donors have reduced their funding and others have completely cut off funding. So as government, you need to see a mechanism of how you'll help lives of people.
This is important. It's from a refugee.
Okay.
This is important. It's from a person of concern, and we need to respond really. First of all, I thank you so much for your submission, and I thank you for paying attention to details when you are in Chaka and Kivale. Some issues we need to do a follow-up, but I want to inform the House that we don't have refugees at reception centers. Our asylum space was closed. We cleared all reception centers. Most of our reception centers are used as quarantine centers as of now. And therefore, that's not right. Maybe it was before that, during emergence. And we all know that during emergence, most of our reception centers, they are overwhelmed by numbers. Hot meals are prepared. We are all partners. We know this. They may not be maybe up to the standard one wants, but generally, there is food, and you will agree with me. But in terms of maybe toilets for people with disabilities in Nakivale, we can do a follow-up. Thank you for appreciating Chaka. And also these reception centers, of course, people are there temporarily, but that's a very strong concern. In terms of security between men and women at shelters, at reception centers, we got a lot of issues from day one. I think that was as a result of M23 in 2012 in Chisoro, when we were very harsh on women staying in this shelter and men staying in the other shelter, and the asylum seekers took us on. They took us on. I said, how can you separate us? I came with my husband. I came with my wife. We reach at the border point. You receive us as a family. When we reach at the transit center, you are saying the man should go this direction and the woman is going this direction. And the men were very tough on us. Where are you taking our women? It became very controversial. What we do, we put those markings at the reception centers. These are shelters for women. These are shelters for men. But remember, this is not a custody. This is the reception center. People meet, people move. And at the end of the day, women and men actually even pull each other, find themselves in one cubicle or the other. It's a community. And what we've done is to put leadership. Can we create leadership within the occupants of the reception center so that they can manage themselves? I know it is still a bit controversial, but because of protection-related issues, that's why we are not manning and we must put women here and lock, put men here and lock. It has a lot of issues. But I think with those structures in place and the commandants taking charge, we hope to improve on that so that even the single female who wants to be alone, maybe they don't want to mix with men, that can also be dealt with the structures we have put in place. But I thank you for your observation, and I request the commandants at a break time, you can reach this person of concern to get more details for our management and administration. I thank you.
I want to thank you also. I'm Hanja Batara, this is Sinjiro.
Kindly be brief because we are going to have the discussion. Different members have to share their views. Just be straight to the point. And for those ones who have questions to our panelists, please feel free to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You see, when you look at the themes, the future of the refugees management, And this kind of COVID, which was not planned, I want to thank the OPM and the government of Uganda for the success registered. Adding my voice to the OPM officer, Mr. Yarhanga, on the lessons learned, I want to agree that they are not specifically there, but they are there. For example, when we were overwhelmed by the number of the refugees at the reception, when the border had been closed, already those people were inside. So they had to come to Sinjiro, for example. You know, the procedure is wrong. And these people had to be settled in order to create a social distance. But then within our own wisdom as a district task force, we had to create a minute to allow the OPM, allow these people access where they can settle. So you can see that something which is not well planned to wait. Second, I want to share with my sister to take heart, because the process was not planned and it was like that. And I think the trials and with situation which is surrounding us. Lastly, because I'm being told to be quick, lastly, as we prepare everything, I would call upon the donors also to see that good model of response of the government of Uganda to refugees, to have a special preparation so that they can fit into the resources for the future success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. RDC. Other comments and questions?
Thank you. Mine is a question. I thank the Office of the Prime Minister for the gaps they have seen and the decision they have taken to resume quickly the registration of asylum seekers. But my question is about the urban setting. Kampala, we all know that at the time of the closure, the refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo are not allowed to be registered in Kampala. And still, these people had come, some of them, because by the time they leave their countries, they don't know what is happening in Uganda, and they don't know where they should go first. And when they enter, they run to the farthest point possible. So they cannot stop in Changwa, near the border. They run far. That's why they find themselves in Kampala, and it's from Kampala where we tell them to go back to the reception centers. But these people have been already in Kampala. They have faced it here. They have nothing now. The registration is resuming when they don't even have transport to go back to the registration center. Do you have any plan for them maybe here in Kampala? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Like Mary highlighted that COVID-19 has increased traumatization and vulnerability of refugees. I imagine what those refugees are going through. Other comments and questions? Mary shared an in-depth presentation on issues of mental health, and I needed to hear from the audience, what is your reflection from her presentation on issues of psychosocial support and the refugees during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you so much. I want to thank Mary for a detailed presentation on psychosocial support. During the pronouncement of the lockdown, I happened to be the vice chairperson of the district task force COVID. Even the task force alone was traumatized by the presidential directives. The way the president was seeing COVID as if it was the end of the world. All powers were withdrawn from the local leaderships, including the district executives and councils, given to the RDCs, as if there was no tomorrow. We spent 2 weeks on having daily meetings. Unfortunately, all the partners in the settlement took off. DPCs were the councillors. And by arresting, RDC arrest those ones who shall pump sense in you, by arresting and torturing, we didn't have partners during the lockdown, the first 2 weeks. When we would make a follow-up, they would say, but chairman, we can do the counseling on phone. Now, on whose phone? With us, we're on the ground. With you, you are in your comfort zones. And you are telling us to move with the phones for counseling. The men at home, bars are closed, schools are closed, food ratios are cut. Look at that situation. But I'm happy after 2 weeks, partners came back and they started now handling the psychosocial support. When it came to schools teaching on radios and TVs, for the host community like in Chiriandongo, those who are teaching on radios, they would at least make some local translations for the learners to understand. But the refugees were not catered for. There was no any local translation for the refugees to grasp what the teacher was teaching. So I saw this category of refugees, this category is being left out. And at the end of the day, they say they're going to do standard exams. Look at that trauma. They're just hearing things in English. There's no local translation. So, having said this, as council, we also needed counseling. All of a sudden, the minister suspends councils. There are no council sittings, not even sub-county councils, not even district councils, but parliament is sitting. What is this? We have our mandate as council. Up to now. So until it took us time to appreciate that this is being done in good faith. But the first 2 weeks was dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, agree.
Thank you. Mine is a concern. As we were trying to present some impacts of COVID-19, Chairman Lamour was talking about the rampant teenage pregnancy. And for a pregnancy to take place, there is, which means there is no protection. Do we have plans of establishing whether it is only the pregnancy or these children who are pregnant or who are involved in the action are also having other type of diseases? If no, then we shall fear COVID-19, and we are trying to establish more of disaster issues in relation to diseases. Thank you.
I think our panelists will share their views on that.
Thank you so much, moderator and the panelists. I just wanted to pick it from the MHPSS presentation and partly on the service, COVID impact on services. And I see a very thin line and so more interconnectedness between the issues that have been raised by the two panelists there. And so to speak was how, for instance, even amidst the low uptake of services because of the many restrictions, the space shrinked for service providers and even partners to be available. And so to speak, I think if we have been following, a number of service providers have equally been infected by COVID. What does that mean? That they themselves actually require the psychosocial support to begin with. And in that they need to be supported as well to support the persons of concern. And for me, as we look towards improving the space, improving the well-being of persons of concern, the well-being of staff amidst the service providers is equally important. And I think hearing recommendations like working from home, preparing staff to appreciate working from home, some of them going to an extent of remote working, phone calling, teleconferencing with clients, I think to me has been a major shift amidst all these, amidst this pandemic, and I think we equally deserve applause, but also continue to look at the welfare of the staff to be able to stand up and serve the need. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's really true. While we would participate in the COVID-19 task force coordination meetings, health workers were also grappling with a number of traumatic and psychological issues. So maybe to Mary, which mechanisms do you think maybe we need to look into to strengthen psychosocial support to partners, because it's very, very critical. Health workers were really struggling to do the identification or mapping out of the contacts, doing all that. And I quote one of the surveillance officers in the district. He said he's very, very fatigued, and he felt like he needs to go home for leave, but he's the only one, and who was to take over. So what do we do? What do we need to do to really help? Because as partners, we have to help the refugees, we have to help the host, but then who is to help us? Yes, Noeline.
Thank you very much. Okay, I know we are handling psychosocial, but allow me to ask in regards to registration, because it's before we close, we may close before I ask my question, and I hope I'm not repeating the same question. It says that this is an experience I had, and I would like to know what OPM says about it. The OPM said that they were handling a backlog of certain cases, of course, the people who hadn't been registered yet, and their borders are all closed. However, we have to recognize the fact that there are porous borders and there are some people still sneaking in. And when these people come in, how do you handle them? Do you give them a chance to, I don't know, do you put them somewhere? Do you actually, welcome them? Because I was faced with a client who came and we assisted them and to go to the right office. However, when they reached that office, the personnel asked us where we had gotten this person from. We told them, of course, they've come, they're asylum seekers. However, they said, no, borders are closed and we are not expected to encounter any asylum seeker. And these people are causing security concern to us. So return your person, and we were stuck. Because we expected that this should be the office to assist them. And we had to return the person to where they were coming from. I mean, we had to return them back to Mbara so that they can get help from another office. However, as OPM, how do you assist such clients who go through porous borders and we face with such persons?
Thank you, Noeline. Other submissions? Yes, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Sorry I came in a little bit late. My name is Hajat Aisha Kayongo. I'm an assistant superintendent of police. I work with the Directorate of Human Resource Development and Training. I sit at police headquarters in Nakuru. My main question and concern goes to the office of the Prime Minister when it comes to your engagement with police when it comes to the future of refugee management in Uganda. Because in many instances, when you talk about how this is done, police officers are always at the forefront. But you may find actually majority of them may not even have a definition of who a refugee is. So as Prime Minister, how far and what mechanisms have you put in place to see how best on the part of the security component we are going to be relevant for us to have this achieved? I thank you.
Thank you very much, Afandi. The whole discussion is how do we improve the future management of refugees? We've been into what we've been doing. The policies are in place. All the basics are there. But a lot needs to be done and readjusted to suit the situation that we are in. But I know as RLP, we've done, in terms of capacity building of police officers, in the different, especially in Kriandongo, Lamwa, Jumani, and most of our field offices, we've had several engagements with police. And I can attest that we have built some of the capacity of the police officers on issues of refugee protection, refugee rights and protection. And a lot is being done in the different training centers of police to ensure that police understand refugee issues. But your context is to OPM on how they intend to strengthen your cooperation on handling issues of refugees. As police, all of you are government. Yes, the next person. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Jackson Omona, District Chairperson, Kitgum. Kitgum does not host refugees. We have foreign nationals who are integrated in the community, settled particularly within the urban area. My question relates to taught us experience and taken care of, and yet the existing social services continue to exert a lot of pressure from the refugee communities. As a non-refugee hosting district, of course, we get a lot of referrals from refugees who are in Palabek refugee settlement in Lamour in terms of health and other services that are normally provided. And yet there's a missing link in terms of extending additional support to these local governments to be able to provide additional support to such refugees. But two, I think that this discussion is very rich in the sense that COVID-19 has helped us as actors and partners in this process to think further in terms of strengthening networking and engaging meaningfully towards refugee response. I think as government, in our different respective capacities, we are taking lessons from a lot of this. We hear submissions from persons of concern. We hear submissions from different actors. But also, during the COVID-19, our personal experience on the ground, we try to engage more closely as local governments, for example, between Kitgum and Lamour, in terms of referrals. We are to set up local networks and on how referral processes could be undertaken to help both refugees and host communities who are tested positive for COVID-19 by sharing the limited resources that we had in terms of sharing information, but also ensuring that personnel from these bordering districts could share information and also share in by supporting one another. For me, moving forward, there is need for particularly development partners and donors to strengthen capacities of the local communities, including refugees, to be able to respond to some of the issues that they can handle at their level, as it has already been presented by some of the panelists. I see a lot in terms of triggering the resources that are already there in build in either host community or in the refugees to be able to respond to some of the issues that cannot be responded to by the actors who may be located far away from the refugee settlements but have resources. I thought I needed just to add on to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from Then our panelists are going to respond to some of the questions highlighted by the audience.
Thank you very much for the tremendous work done to achieve success of forced migration. The Office of OPM and police, my appeal to the IGP, who is presented by Assistant Commissioner of Police, I would kindly appeal if we can have a unit. When I was a senior consultant of General Karakaihula, we tried to say that we create a unit on family issues in police and also land. It would be my humble request if you put a request to the current IGP to say that we have a unit called Refugee Protection Unit. This unit would be well trained with a certificate on refugee issues, the laws, and the challenges, so that when they are in such areas, they are equipped by all the tools needed when handling refugees, because refugees are different from the normal Ugandans. They don't at times understand English, they don't understand even Swahili, but you need to communicate to them. So these need a special unit from the Uganda police, even with other security sisters, when they are handling their disputes. The other issue that will go to the director for refugee and all other partners, I kindly appeal to get a report on the report will be based on access to justice. Today at around 8 o'clock, I tried to speak to the Chief Justice that as they are creating constituencies in different districts, we have a lot of members of parliament. We need also to have more magistrates, judges. You'd find in some of these areas, like Lamo, Koboko, Ajumani, and other areas, access to justice is so hard because they have limited chief magistrates, they have limited residency judges. We need to compile a report, which report will be submitted to Chief Justice. Then Chief Justice will also present to Parliament, because those areas have got a huge number of people and they need access to justice. The other position that will be also taken into consideration, I appeal to RDCs, the commanders from Office of the APM and others, to also have sessions or certificates in mediation so that they can also be a weapon in reducing conflict in such settlements. The other position that should be also taken into consideration, despite the COVID, the factor of diabetes, HIVs are still a constant factor. As you are planning for all these COVID issues, I kindly appeal to consider the HIV AVR should be properly given to those infected. Those with the diabetes should be able to go to the dialysis. They should also be supported on medical. A point to be noted, Northern Uganda has got the highest ratio number of sickle cells, and sickle cells is never given attention, either by hospitals and also by refugee settlements. Thank you very much for giving me this chance of submission.
Thank you very much. I request our panelists to respond in two minutes to the highlighted issues.
Okay, thank you so much. I think mine are 3 issues. One is about new arrivals from DRC Congo not being registered in Kampala. They are pushed to the settlements. I think I need to put it right that what was suspended was a blanket prima facie status for refugees from Congo. It was to be put under scrutiny who benefits from prima facie or not, because there was an abuse. People come from everywhere in DRC. They are coming for business. They are coming for activity Y and Z. And when they are stuck in Kampala, they choose the soft way of seeking asylum. And that is abusing the asylum space. The management made a decision that yes, these are persons of concern. We can subject them to REC, Refugee Eligibility Committee, and see who qualifies for this space. When you are coming to Uganda, you must pass through a border point. We all know that. Yes, there could be others who have used maybe air transport, land in Entebbe, find themselves in Kampala, but we are not forcing them to get out of Kampala. We are using a system called referral. We refer you to where your case will be determined. And that is within the management of refugee asylum. And I think that's the best we could do. You also get to understand that international law is very clear about prima facie. It's not a permanent status. It can be given by the line minister in a bracket of 2 years. It can be renewed. It cannot be renewed. So if the minister finds it that now, at least this situation is a bit normal, let everybody explain why he's interested in international protection. That's not a bad idea for this country, a sovereign state, a country that is concerned with the security of its nationals. So it's a referral pathway, and I'm very sure that those who have gone to the settlements where they are referred, they get quick attended to by REC and get status if they qualify, and those who don't qualify can continue with the process of appeals and all that. And I'm actually aware that some people actually have qualified for prima facie, most especially when their cases are heard from the time of registration. So we don't force DRC asylum seekers from Kampala. We just reorganized ourselves in terms of how to manage this space. 2 is about people who use porous borders, find themselves in a country during this COVID-19. It's a very big challenge to us. We have very many porous borders, but we have worked with task forces and the RDCs here, and the chairperson of the LC5 will agree with me that the Office of the Prime Minister is not mandated by any law to man any border point in this country. There are authorities that are in charge of entry points to this country. We receive people when they have passed through that. When you say the borders are closed, and this is important, Madam, who is chairing this session, I think it is a gist of this thing of registration and COVID-19, because it is bothering most of our partners. And between us as OPM and local government, we've been battling with it. People must find a way to enter the country. What did we do? This is the duty of security, immigration and security. And we had advised our focal person at border points, please, if that person is brought to you, hand over to security. Our country closed its borders. That officer who advised you to return that person did the right thing. How to implement that is a different thing. You don't say, please take away. No, there is a better way of implementing that. And for us, including actually quarantine. The task force is actually for them once you hand over, 14 days, fast. You entered the country illegally. We can't be sure of who you are in terms of COVID-19. We have to take your test. You have to be quarantined for 14 days, and then the rest of the measures will continue. That's how we have been cooperating, OPM, task force, and security, to make sure that we implement the presidential directives, and we are not caught off guard on the other side of the law. The other issue, police capacity building, you explained it thoroughly well, but I think, Afande, you have a point. Because, you see, security is not something to play with. There is no one who will say, I'm giving you a police officer, and he's going to be here for the next 14 days. A police officer can be deployed today, can be transferred tomorrow. So for you, if you did training last year in September, and you say I built capacities of police, then you get it wrong. Maybe I would concur with my brother to have a special unit, but in terms of security, that because we had proposed it, and Chris knows that we had moved, but we don't need to. There is a term they used in security to make refugees as a so special group, because that affects integration also. That you are creating even a security unit for refugees, yet these people are here temporarily. They are supposed to go back in case the situation normalizes. It is as if you are saying these people must stay. Yes, we know people have stayed for long, and because of reasons well known, but we cannot again prepare security for that. But I think the issue, this is a very important issue, chairperson of this panel, and I think we need to harmonize some of these things. And when we come for these sessions, there are points we need to exhaust so that we avoid contradictions. And they are very, very important. So the issue of security, it needs that touch. Now, when police comes in and they are getting out and you have capacity building sessions, for us now we are recommending what we call continuous capacity building. Between OPM and the UNHCR protection team, we are saying, can we have every quarter, we have a training session, we have capacity building. Now, Refugee Law Project, if you have your training sessions at the field level, sit with commandants and UNHCR and make sure that at least in every 2-3 months, we have those trainings, so that even if somebody is transferred, a new person who has come. Of course, the officers in charge, the DPCs will be identifying those who have not gone through this. Like this time of elections, most police officers will be moved time and again, depending on where there is a need. So capacity building is continuous. Lastly, is refugee who are staying in a district and it is not recognized as a hosting district. It is very true because of settlement policy. Refugees move from one location to another. You find yourself, people of Kitugum, having a big number. Either they are doing business, but you are not facilitated in terms of hosting. We are coming up with a new approach, which we have called refugee-affected districts. Look at a district like Kisoro. It has no settlement, but it has been receiving with a transit center, I don't know for how many years. Look at a district like Amur. Look at a district like Bundubujo, Kanungu. These are areas where we have refugees time and again, but we do not support them in terms of resources because they are not hosting refugees. So we are coming up with a new innovation, which we have called refugee-affected districts. This is our baby. The discussions are still going on to see how these districts can start benefiting from these projects. I thought I would clear air on these issues, and Chair, I'm sorry if I took more time, but I had saved my minutes, so I'm still utilizing the saved time. I thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for clearing the air on certain issues. And you're very right, there are certain issues that need deeper discussion. But I've been noticed that Professor Laura is online, and she was supposed to give the keynote address for this panel discussion. So I request Gilbert to connect us to her such that she can be able to share her keynote address on issues of COVID-19 and its impact, the opportunities, challenges for forced migrants in the Great Lakes region. Professor Laura is welcome for her address. Maybe as, oh, good. The technical team is trying to sort the sound issue, so you just be patient with them.
Are you going to read those ones? If you're not going to read them, give them to me. The one I gave you. No problem. I'll give them to you. Don't worry.
As the technical team continues to sort the issue of Professor Laura to be able to share with us, especially the sound, I really appreciate the audience for sharing your views on issues of refugees. I know when discussions start on discussing on certain issues, especially registration and others, they don't end. And maybe this calls for an independent or maybe other more dialogues to discuss these issues, because it will help us to have a deeper discussion. Gilbert, any progress yet? Or Mary can be responding.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, the person who asked the question. And thanks to our viewers online, their responses that are coming through from viewers online. And I think one of them that I picked was that psychosocial needs for children is still a very huge gap. And the question related still to children. With the increased pregnancy, are we only dealing with pregnancy, or are we dealing with other issues like HIV or hepatitis B or those other issues? And on top of that, are we dealing with other, probably mental health issues? How are these children handling the pregnancy? Are some of them running away from home? Or are there, of course, conflict between parents and the children? And I think I agree with you that it's a key issue. And so I think we can think about all that. And yes, it is a huge gap. And the question was, what do we do? And I don't have the answer, honestly. But I think what we need to do is, for children, we need to strengthen the support systems. We need to strengthen the support systems. I think one of the challenges that COVID has brought is the fact that caretakers, because they have also been distressed and destabilized in very many ways, their ability to protect their children has been minimized. Specifically for the refugees that we work with, most of the caretakers are very worried that children no longer respect them, no longer listen to them, because they are not able to satisfy their needs. And so I think one of the things we need to do is to strengthen that support system, the caretakers, to empower them. First of all, to do psychosocial support for them so that they are empowered to be able to meaningfully engage with their children. But also, I think there's need for, I think when lockdown happened, there was there was crisis and there was no measure. There was no interventions that targeted children. And I think that was a big miss, because when you talk about teenage pregnancy, you don't only talk about the diseases that might be accompanying it. You also think about the children who are going to be born. How are they going to grow? Are they going to grow in the right environment, or they are going to come out when they are already traumatized, and their parents who are children themselves are traumatized, and so a cycle of vulnerability happens there. So I think it's important that we try to support the families, the caretakers, but also create spaces and support, psychosocial support for children specifically. We urgently need to do that. We urgently need to do that. And different organizations and development partners, I think that is one of the key areas we need to highlight, because we know that trauma which happens during childhood actually does not end. It continues within adulthood and can cause a lot of damage in the future generation. So that one is a key area we need to look at. And then for service providers, it is true that the chairperson of Chiriandongo said in the first two weeks of lockdown, all service providers ran away. And that's true. Everyone was dealing with their own crisis. And we know that some service providers have gotten infected with COVID-19. And that fear applies to everyone. And so there's need to empower staff. I think I talked about the fact that there's need for training. There's need for orientation about these services. That even the online support that psychosocial workers are giving is not the usual. The strain it has is different from the face-to-face. In our conference, the last week of this month, someone is going to be talking about fatigue, digital fatigue, in terms of giving tele-counseling, tele-mental health. And so these are things that we need to keep discussing and helping and supporting staff. The other thing is psychosocial workers and other service providers need support supervision. They need support supervision because the chairperson said, I was traumatized. We were all traumatized. If that support supervision is not there, and this needs to come from, for mental health and psychosocial support services, this needs to come from people who have the expertise in supporting staff in that area. And of course, there are other support. At Refugee Law Project, one of the things we did during the lockdown was to do kind of an orientation for staff on how to do online support. Of course, it was during a crisis. It was not enough, but we did something. We oriented staff on how to conduct the service. But we've been doing different meetings, debrief meetings, to help staff speak about the challenges that they are going through. Those are some of the support systems that we can have, but we can't continue operating as usual. The support for staff, psychosocial support for staff, has to be incorporated within the service provision. For people who are writing proposals, different organizations, it's now time to mainstream psychosocial support for staff in your proposals so that staff get the support they need to be able to continue doing the service. Otherwise, if a psychosocial support staff is not helped to handle their own distress, they transfer it to the other people. And so we do a lot of damage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And for Chairman, you have something to respond to?
Just one thing. On the issue of teenage pregnancy, we did a study with one of the local partners in Lamour to really understand the trend of this child's teenage pregnancy. The study reveals that even before COVID, we had children getting pregnant. But during the period of COVID, the cases of child pregnancy went up. And that really showed to us that COVID, in one way or another, impacted. The other question that was raised, that with this child pregnancy, what are other associated problems? I think there is need to do more studies around some of the impact of the COVID-19, and that is my strong recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As the technical team continues to see mechanisms of how to connect us to Professor Laura, I can request the audience, in case there is any comment from any individual still on our discussion, you feel free to share.
Yeah, thank you so much. In the presentations, we were informed of the refugee response plan. It's only the education sector that has realized the funds. The other sectors, there are still a very big funding gap. But when you look at the refugee response plan, there is no deliberate attempt to address the psychosocial gap. And with the local governments in our staff structures, we don't have these cadres. And when we talk of integration of services, I think it's time, Office of the Prime Minister and these local governments, to advocate for these critical cadres in that they can be recruited in local governments. Because we are integrating all the other sectors, but the mental health and psychosocial services, we are not mentioning this, and it's not coming out clearly, which means we shall keep engaging partners into this. And this brings me back to the point I was saying, that in the first 2 weeks, we were all stuck because we didn't have this cadre at a local government level who would come in and give this support in the absence of the partners. So as government, I think we need to come up and advocate and show cause for these cadres, in that they can be included in the structures of local governments. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think OPM can respond to this. I think this is one of the key emerging issues, that psychosocial support is not clearly stated, and there is no clear direction, especially in the refugee response framework. And Mary highlighted it clearly, that it's one of the least funded sector in the refugee protection. So we really need to get mechanisms of how to respond. Just thank you. I've been notified that due to technical challenges, the session, the keynote address by Professor Laura, will take place after lunch. So kindly respond to that as you give your final remark. Thank you. In 1 minute.
Thank you so much. You're still cheating on my minutes, but it's fine. We shall sort out ourselves. I think it's important. Traditional civil service do not have some of these cadres, like counselors and maybe psychosocial support officers. But under projects, we have advocated for that, like at OPM, under project, not in the mainstream public service. We have those cadres, and I think local government, we can't do away with some of these partners, because the whole process may call for restructuring and all that. But I think it's a good initiative that we have to start thinking about this and putting resources aside for this. I think under the response plan for health, something was put in that sector. But we need to push even when we are, because the livelihood, jobs and livelihood sector is still under preparation, and you have a lot of input from local government and other line ministers, but spearheaded by Ministry of Gender. So probably your officer who deals with Ministry of Gender directly need to share those inputs so that they can be catered for. I entirely agree with you. It's an area we must think about. It's an area we must give emphasis. But any project that is coming, you can also advocate for some of those contracted staff. But in the mainstream of public service, as of now, some of those cadres are not catered for. My remarks in terms of this session, I thank you for listening to me. We continue with the discussions after lunch. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the other also key issue is on children. At the local government, it's mainly the probation officer that handles that. But I think little resources are being directed to it. And we really need to think of a way to advocate still on increasing maybe human resource and funding for children-related issues. Chairman, your remark.
Thank you very much for all the observations. I think what remains key is that in this era of COVID, there is need for strengthening coordination of all the partners that are working so that resources are really used well. Secondly, there is need that as government, we really need to look at some of the critical resources that we need to channel to local governments in terms of addressing the impact of COVID-19, particularly issues of the human resource, issues of PPEs in the local governments. I think that is really key. The third issue is that mechanisms of creating awareness in our community, we really need to continue creating awareness about COVID-19 in our community. And I think that will go a long way in strengthening the local structures in the ground to fight the COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for listening to us and me specifically. My final remarks are that psychosocial issues affect each one of us. And so we either handle them, we either address them, or we let them take us on. Sorry if I'm using hard language. 2, for psychosocial needs for children, it is the same that I'm going to say. I think for a long time, children have been, of course, it has been a responsibility of caretakers and parents and families to address the issues of children and protect children. But a lot of things have happened to the families. For refugees, families have been broken so hard. For those where the families are, the caretakers and parents are, they have been extremely wounded that their ability to be caretakers and parents to their children has been diminished. And so, as organizations, as development partners, as government, we need to come up with, I know Ministry of Gender spearheads this, but wherever we are in our different areas of influence, we need to come up with mechanisms of helping the family, the household, to deal with the issue of parenting and helping children to grow in safer spaces. If we don't do that, what happens to children usually is pushed on to other generations. Thank you.
Thank you, the dear panelists. Thank you, the audience. Indeed, COVID-19 is worsening the situation of refugee protection and management. And as partners, key stakeholders, and the refugees who are here, we need to join hands to think of collaborative and sustainable mechanisms to improve the lives and dignity of refugees. Thank you very much. I hand over to the day manager. Please clap for me.
Thank you, Charity. You really deserve the hand clap. And thanks to the panelists as well. Our lunch is ready. We'll have lunch at the restaurant. You take the same route as you're going to the washrooms, but then there's you turn right and the restaurant is just below. We're going to use 40 minutes for lunch and 5 minutes to get back here. To catch up along the road and talk a bit. So let's use 40 minutes to have our lunch and 5 minutes to be back. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch. And so those who may leave us after lunch, please, please, please sign the signature chart. Thank you. The coupons are with patients. You pick it as you get out, right at the door, patients over there. Thank you.